All right. Hopefully you received my email with the agenda. The agenda looks something like this. It's pretty handy because it has a bunch of links to resources throughout. I'll reference some of them, but I'm not going to go into them in detail. You're certainly welcome to go look at them on your own. There's also a form we're going to use inside of it to develop a rubric today. Let's switch over to my presentation here. If you didn't receive the agenda email, if you go to my website, which is teachlearntech.com, and click on the DTLN in the navigation menu, you'll find the agenda and the slide deck link there. It says teachlearntech.com. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So my computer's thinking, thanks for being here, whether this is the beginning of your summer or the end of your school year. It's still kind of a hectic time, so I'm glad that you guys could join me today. We are going to talk about rubrics as learning progressions. Yesterday I did kind of an overview of the balanced assessment, which includes pre-assessments, summative assessments, and then formative assessment strategies in between. And we're really focused on formative assessment strategies and how rubrics can help you determine what those might be, both so your students can monitor their learning and you can monitor their learning. So this is part of the Dell Texas Learning Network. It's a relatively new initiative, started last year, and your district is a part of it. And so this webinar and many, many other webinars are available to you. And I am a consultant with a group called Advanced Learning Partnerships. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself later, but I've been doing this work for 10 years, a good bit of it in Texas, even though I now live in Virginia. Texas, where I started my teaching career, and then moved to Virginia. So we are recording, and you know what that means. I intend for this to be kind of very interactive, so I'm hoping you will chat with me or talk with me because we need examples from your work. This is not just a lecture. So as we go through, think about how the topics we're talking about, how you can adopt them to your setting and how we can make it more relevant to you. So as I said, my name is John Ross, and you have my contact information if you have any questions that you want to follow up. I did start my teaching career in Brazosport ISD down south of Houston, and then moved to Virginia. And then I got a degree in instructional design technology and have been working in online and blended learning since the 90s, really, doing a wide range of things. And I worked for 10 years in a research lab, a fairly funded research lab, educational research lab, where we looked at new emerging technologies and we did curriculum mapping and designing. There's a lot of interesting different things. And then for the past 10 years, I've been with Advanced Learning Partnerships, and I work with districts and schools all across the country on a wide range of things. I am co-author of the first, and I still believe the only textbook on the ISTE standards for educators, which I know is something that Texas has adopted for teacher preparation programs. So hopefully those standards are meaningful and relevant to you. And so there's a book there on addressing them. So enough about me. I'd like to know a little bit more about you. I learned a little bit about Lynn yesterday, but still either in the chat or just unmute yourself. You know, if you feel comfortable with video, let's do that. Let me know how you, first of all, who you are and what you do, and then how you know when you have learned something new. What's that like for you?
I'm Lynn Millard, and I'm an instructional technologist in Beaumont. And I know I've learned something when I can do something with it. I can apply it. That light bulb comes on and I can see a real life use for it.
Good, good. That's a real hallmark of from a lot of different learning models of when learning has reached when you reach the point of you have really become automatic in what you know and can do. How about others? Either in the chat or here we go in the chat. My chat's not showing. There it is. All right. Hi, Rob. Oh, no. Paula says she can't find her audio. All I can offer to help is, and you probably have done this already, but under the mute or unmute button, there's a little caret. It's an upside down caret. And you can see if you can change your sound settings there. But if your sound's not working, Rob or Paula, how do you know when you have learned something new? I think it's completely personal. I will tell you that the answer I most often get to this question is when I can teach it to somebody else. And I was really surprised to read in the book How People Learn from the National Research Council that I believe that's what it's called, How People Learn. That very often there are people who learn things and become very expert at them, but can't tell people how to do it, or they can't teach other people. And I think a lot of teachers say that they can teach something once they've learned it because you are an excellent teacher. And so you've learned how to be a teacher. And some people just haven't learned how to be a teacher. Oops, we have somebody. Rebecca is in the waiting room. We'll let Rebecca come in. All right, so while Rebecca is joining us, let's go ahead. So today we are, hopefully you are going to contribute some ideas about rubrics and how you use them, because you'll get tired of my voice otherwise. And Rebecca, we welcome you here. If you want to share, thanks Paula, if you want to share who you are and what you do in the chat, we're going to move on. So I went into this idea, this graphic in detail yesterday. I'm not going to go into it again, but this was built off of the idea of a backwards design approach. And when I first started teaching, I did not take a backwards design approach. I went from day to day and I would create activities for one day and then I created for the next day. And then after a while, my principal came to me and said, John, you have to turn some grades, so you need to create some kind of an assessment. And so I created a test based on what I had taught rather than being a little bit more open about thinking about what do the kids really need to learn. And so over time, I got better at that. And I really had some good mentors to help me figure that out. But in this graphic, we always start with what kids need to know and be able to do. And those are given to us through the TEKS in Texas. And the TEKS are at different levels of cognitive ability. Oh, thank you, Rebecca, Director of Instructional Technology. And I'm going to say Anahuac. I hope I said that correctly. So the first step in developing learning progression is to figure out what are all the TEKS that I'm going to address, whether you're going to do it in a unit or you're going to do it across the year, across the grading period. So you have to list them all and then kind of look through them. And from there, Wiggins and McTighe developed the Understanding by Design instructional design model. And they say that from your analysis of the standards, you should develop essential questions. And we talked a little bit about those. We'll talk a little bit about those today. Essential questions are questions that really get the learner interested in what you want them to learn. And then from there, after you've reviewed your TEKS and after you've developed essential questions, then you develop your final assessment. So you develop your final assessment first before you design your instruction. Now, every year we add more things and more ideas, more lessons, more activities, more assessment opportunities. So you may just be, instead of designing assessment, maybe using assessment used in the past or somebody in your department has used. But in Understanding by Design, after you've analyzed your standards and you figured out why this is really important for kids to learn, the first step that Wiggins and McTighe suggest is you design your assessments. And that's very true in other backwards design models as well. There's one called the Dick and Carey instruction, what's it called? The systemic design of instruction model. It's not the sexiest name for a design model, but it's also a backwards design model, and they suggest the same thing. Figure out your learning targets first, design your assessment, and then you populate your curriculum with activities. Throughout all of that, you are using formative assessment strategies to see where kids are. And so really this graphic to me, when you look at these stars, the stars are lessons. I didn't really have a good icon for a lesson. So the stars are lessons. The little laptops suggest that some of your lessons will be technology based, or that you have to teach things about technology. The little orange process is sometimes you have to teach processes. You have to teach kids how to access resources, or you have to teach kids how to collaborate in a team, or a lot of different kinds of things. So if you're going to assess those things at the end, you want to make sure you teach them throughout your curriculum. So that's kind of the big picture idea of understanding of backwards design, is you design your assessment first, and then you design these activities, and instruction leads up to it. But from this progression, we can actually create a progression of how students are most likely to learn. That's the important part. As a new teacher, it's a little bit harder to figure that out, but very quickly, I think teachers learn that they work with kids enough that they see how kids learn their topic. So I asked the question earlier, and Rebecca, you were just coming in as we were wrapping up, about how you know when you have learned something. And Lynn said that when she can apply it, and I would suggest that learning science would agree with Lynn, that the goal of learning is transfer. And so by transfer, we mean that it's something that you can apply to a new situation, that you develop knowledge and skills, and then you're given a new situation and you're able to adapt it or to apply it. So that final assessment can be that opportunity for transfer, but it's generally going to have to be one that's at a kind of a deeper level of cognitive demand in your standards. So here's some suggestions on what it might be like to know that you have learned something. So when you can explain and interpret things, and maybe even make connections to your own life or connections to your own experiences, and even have perspectives so that you can connect it to other people. And also understand when you don't know something, when you know that you're developing knowledge and that there's still some things or skills, and there's still some things you have left to work on. So for many, many years, a lot of educators are familiar with the Bloom's taxonomy, and this is the revised Bloom's that came out in the 80s, using slightly different verbiage. And we know at the bottom are foundational skills, and you have to be able to do those things before you can get to the things at the top. So it's kind of additive, but it's also not the complete Bloom's matrix that, even though this is simple and easy to understand, the actual Bloom's matrix has these different kinds of knowledge. And as you go down the types of knowledge, they become more cognitively complex. In every grade and every subject, you will have kids that have to get to procedural knowledge, and we hope we get them to think about their learning that metacognitive knowledge, because that's the deepest kind of learning. So when you ask a kid, now that we've gone through this lesson, now that we've gone through this unit, what do you know now that you didn't know before? And how can you show me that? You can do that with kids who are 5 years old or 7 years old. I was at a workshop once, and I had these two teachers giggle in front of me and say, well, my kids are in middle school, they can't be metacognitive. And of course they can be. Everybody can be. So that is one way to think about the depth of knowledge of, or the cognitive difficulty of our standards. I like this framework developed by Norm Webb, and he calls them the depth of knowledge levels. And if you look at them, they're very similar to the ones that we just saw. So here's the ones: factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, metacognitive knowledge. They're very simple or similar to those. So at the shallowest level of learning, we can recall or comprehend things. And we have to do that. You have to be able to recall language and use language appropriately. You have to understand formulas and all different kinds of things. But then you start to build more discrete skills. I'm talking, these are like practice items that we would do so that we can later group them together for larger skills. And then when you get to strategic thinking, that's where you're applying those things in maybe a more complex or challenging setting, probably a real world setting, maybe looking at real world phenomena, until you get to extended thinking. And extended thinking is when you think about your thinking, and that is what metacognitive knowledge is. So they are very similar, the Bloom's matrix and the depth of knowledge levels. And this just, sorry, I should have hit that one. This just kind of shows a comparison of the two. Eric Francis is a consultant. I'm going to share a little bit of his work, who writes about the depth of knowledge levels. And I really like how he uses these questions. And he has some other questions that you can use to think about the levels of cognitive difficulty in your standards and in the activities that you want your kids to do. So here, this is Eric's, this is linked on the agenda. I hope you received the agenda. If you didn't, I can pull it up. Let's see, I'm not sure everybody was on my email list, but let me look here. If you go to this, I'm gonna put it in the chat. I say that and it didn't work, hold on. Copy. All right, so the agenda can be found there. I really like the way that this chart moves away from just identifying verbs, because verbs are contextual. And I know we were taught to break down standards by verbs, but I think this chart does a better job of helping us organize content for kids and looking at our standards. And you can even give this chart to kids. I know teachers who will print this out. And when the kids have discussion, they'll say, you know, we need to get at least a few strategic thinking and in at least one extended thinking question into your conversation, so that kids are increasingly going back and forth between different levels of cognitive difficulty, or cognitive demand, I should say. Difficulty is the wrong word, it should be cognitive demand. So what does that mean? So if we think about these 4 levels, we can start to draft what looks like a rubric, right? So this example here is, I don't have any standards listed in my rubric yet, but if I listed the standards in the left, I could then think about, okay, what are the things that they need to comprehend or identify first? What are the key ideas or people, places, concepts, things like that? Then what are some of the component skills that kids have to develop along the way? These are not the big, complex, challenging skills. These are things, discrete skills they can practice over time to get better, to get to the point of strategic thinking where you're thinking, okay, where do the kids really use it? Like Lynn said, she knows that she's learned something when she can really use it and do something with it. And Lynn, actually, that is the point of transfer. So with all of your students, you want to really try to get them to that point of transfer. So we're trying to create problems or projects or activities or performances that get them to that point. And then extended thinking is actually, if you've gotten kids to that point, there's a lot of ways you can get kids to reflect back on, what did you learn? What do you know now that you didn't know? What did you think that you knew that might have been incorrect that you changed? Now that you know this, how are you going to use this information or these skills in the future? So this is the basic framework that I use for a rubric. You notice it doesn't say anything like students can do this 1 time, and then the next one is students can do it 3 times. Because quantifying things, it doesn't mean that you've actually learned it better. Remember, you want to get to transfer, and whether I can drive my car 5 miles or 500 miles, I can still drive my car. And so it doesn't matter how far I drive it to demonstrate that I can drive. So let's stop there. I want to see if there are any questions first, and then I have a bunch of different examples. how's everybody feeling about this idea of rubrics that describe the increasing complexity of learning that kids go through? Lynn's got thumbs up. That's a nice use of your reactions there, Lynn. Thanks. Oh, we're great. Rebecca says she likes it. Good. If you have any questions and you feel free to unmute and ask, that would be great. Okay, let's move on. So I have lots of different examples that apply this, and I like this one developed with he was a social studies teacher I worked with in Vancouver, Washington. It's across the river from Portland, Oregon. He was a social studies teacher, and we were trying to think about this increasing cognitive demand of social studies standards, but he also coached Pee Wee basketball, and he really liked basketball. And I know almost nothing about basketball. And so together, we created this basketball progression. And I think this is linked. Yes, it is. Okay. So you have a link to this on your agenda as well. And what this does is it breaks down when you were learning basketball, what are all those things that you have to comprehend? What are all those things that you have to identify or recall? Okay. I'm going to go back to my progression. There. I think you can see that. That should be pretty big. So they have to know the rules of the game. That doesn't mean that they can demonstrate the rules of the game. They have to know what they are. They have to know what the ball is. They have to know what the court looks like. They have to know the way to shoot the ball, because there are like proper ways to dribble and proper ways to shoot the ball and do a layup and all that kind of stuff. And then the next step is we're talking about discrete skills. So we teach kids discrete skills in basketball would be, this is how you dribble without walking. This is how you do a free throw. This is how you do a layup. This is how you pass the ball. We teach them, we have little plays that we can get them to do, and we have them practice the plays over and over again. That's what the practice is for a lot of basketball teams. But then finally, in the third column, strategic thinking is the kids play a game. Games are complex. Just because you know the rules and you know the vocabulary and you can dribble the ball and you can shoot, in a game, there's so much complexity going on that you can't control. But that's when kids have to take all that knowledge and skill and apply it in a unique situation. And they could even lose the game, but still demonstrate that they understand the skills and the knowledge. Winning or losing the game has nothing to do with what they learned. And in fact, the extended thinking part, where we're thinking about having them reflect, is most teams, I taught music, I taught band. And so every Monday morning after we had marching band on Friday night or Saturday at a contest, every Monday morning we'd come in and we would watch the tape, right? And we would comment on the tape and we would make notes about what we needed to fix. Football teams do it, dancers do it, basketball teams certainly do it. So that is the extended thinking part of this progression for learning basketball. So I find this a very helpful analogy. I'm hoping it resonates with some of you, but I have some that are more academic. So I'm showing you the traditional rubric format, but they don't all have to look that way. This one here, I did this with an English team I live in Virginia, so they were in Richmond. And what they did is they took all of their grammar standards, and grammar standards tend to not get very deep, right? Because they're processes, they're discrete skills. But they were able to show the progression that kids would learn based on the color. So the blue is the things that the sixth grade teachers would probably address the first 9 weeks. And then they would add the green things in the second 9 weeks, and then the yellow. And there's more to it than that, but this is just one example of how how the progression is similar to, but slightly different from the one I shared before. You do not have to be able to read this at all, but I want you to notice the color coding in this. I love flowcharts. I love sticky notes. I put them on the wall and I draw lines between them, and I like whiteboards and I draw bubbles. And so I like concept mapping. This is another way to design a learning progression. And the way this one works is at the top, The red at the top is the final cornerstone assessment, the point where we want kids to demonstrate that they've transferred their learning and they've thought about it. At the bottom, you'll see the little gray circles, and little gray circles are things that are the prerequisite skills that kids come into. Now, this is an outline for a unit on watersheds, and it might be 6th grade as well. I can't remember. And so you start in the bottom with the yellow area, moving your way up through the bottom. You don't necessarily have to go from one bullet to the other. Sometimes you cover more than one at a time. And then once you've gotten there, you would start working on the green ones, and then you would start working on the blue ones, and to the point where it all focuses up. The white ovals at the top are connections to other content areas. So this is a science activity where the kids have to justify whether people should or should not build on a wetland. And so they've learned argumentative writing and persuasive writing in the past. So those are connections to other content areas. So just another diagram. The full diagram is available on the agenda. I just wanted to show you that not all learning progressions have to look exactly the same. And you can design learning progressions for a lot of different things. It doesn't just have to be your academic standards. Some other districts I work, in fact, after this, I have a meeting with a district in Texas that has a learner profile, and they are trying to design a rubric or a matrix around how kids develop the more social and learning type skills that are in that learning progression. This is work I did with the Tennessee School for the Deaf, and they have competencies that students have to demonstrate that are not strictly academic ones. So this one, the students have to demonstrate goal setting. I mean, what a great thing. I mean, every kid should probably learn that, right? So I worked with the teachers, and we talked about, when it comes to goal setting, what does it look like at the end? Remember, in Understanding by Design, we talked about the end. And so that statement at the top is what it looks like at the end. And then we said, so to get there, what's the first step? What do they need to know? What do they need to identify or recall or comprehend? And so that all went into that first column. And then what are some skills you could teach them? And these are like discrete skills that are not go out and live with a goal for 5 weeks and then reflect on it. That comes later. But these kids would practice, they would identify goals. They would talk about what is a good goal and what is not a good goal. And they would write goals and they would share their goals. And then at some point, it's a residential school and the kids would have to go home. And so their activity was, you have to monitor how well you follow your goals when you're not here in the classroom, when you're at home. So just another way to think about that. And that's where we developed this form that has, how are you going to teach this and how are you going to assess it? And you can see that there are assessments all along the way, and that it's not always take a multiple choice test or always write a paper. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And once you've identified what they need to comprehend and what the skills and things, then the assessments become easier to identify. So I showed you the basketball rubric, but you can, the basketball learning progression, but you can take that and then turn that into some kind of a rubric. So hopefully you can read this. If not, it's downloadable from the agenda. There are two different ways to do rubrics. One is to just give a general score or impression for a category. And the other is to break the category down into discrete ideas, and that's called a composite rubric. So you see both of those here. The points are there because points are a part of our life as teachers, and it would be nice if we didn't have to have points. And I know that scoring is probably easier if you don't use 100 points. If you use, the fewer points you use, evidently, if you look at the research on grading, the fewer points you use, the easier it is for kids, and you get a more accurate result. But I was working with a school district in Memphis that used a grading system that had 100 points, and they had to figure out, okay, if these are our competencies, how are we going to do that? So you can see that if you can meet all of the DOK1 stuff, if you can recall all the vocabulary, you know all the rules to the game, all that, you know how to shoot the ball, then you can score up to 20 points. You might not get them all, but you can score up to 20 points. And then if you can do all the basic discrete skills, you can earn up to another 30 points. So we're now up to 50. And then in the transfer, in the game, if you can demonstrate those things and you're observing the kids and they demonstrate those things, you're way up to, you could demonstrate up to 90% of what's going on. But if you don't do that reflection, if you don't do that metacognitive thinking about, now that I've played this game, what do I know? What did I learn? What did I learn from playing the game? How am I going to do things different? And so that's one way we kind of broke that out in terms of how this rubric could be scored. In the composite rubric, you can actually give that to kids and say, you need to do these things. And you can highlight the things you can do. And if you can't do them, then, if you understand and can describe the mechanics of shooting and dribbling and passing, but you can't dribble, pass, and shoot the ball with appropriate form, then that's what you need to work on next. So the rubric actually guides the learners through. This became really important this past year when our kids weren't in front of us all the time. So if we had rubrics that describe learning progressions, you can give those out at the beginning of the unit, at the beginning of the year. You can say, this is what you're going to learn. You can do a self-assessment at the beginning. Kids can peer review each other to see if they can do these skills that you've identified, or they can even self-assess themselves. This is that big flow chart in a rubric. So we looked at that big flow chart for the watershed that had the red, yellow, and all that kind of stuff. This is the rubric for that. It's not all of it. It's all linked on the agenda. But this is how that big flow chart then became a rubric that could guide kids that they could use to figure out where they are. So let's look at, like, remember the yellow was down in the bottom in the left-hand corner. That was kind of the first part of the unit. And it had a lot of the vocabulary and it had map use. So in this particular rubric, if they just know the vocabulary and they can only identify things on a map, then they're only at the developing level. They're only at the second level. They haven't gotten to strategic thinking. So if we give them an activity, though, where they draw and explain a topographical map, or they rough out a topographical map in some way, then they're going into the next level, which is the point of transfer, which is where we want kids to get. So I mentioned formative assessment. For me, formative assessment strategies occur every day. And if you have a rubric that clearly describes the path that most kids will take to learn things, then they can answer these questions. They can see, oh, I'm going to the far end, or I'm at least going to column 3 where that's transfer. And then you can use that rubric, like I said, to self-reflect and say, well, this is what I can do, or I can't do all these things yet. So that's where they need to go next. How to get there is a little bit harder. That's usually what you have to do as a teacher, is you have to tell them how students, what activities they should do. And we do that in class very easily, but sometimes when they're not in front of us, we use things like learning menus or choice boards, or we have clearly guided assignments and they walk through them. But if you have that rubric up front, then it saves your kids time, it saves you time. And I believe even, like, we had a lot of parents who were teachers, and clear rubrics could have helped a lot of parents figure out what they could do to help their kids, especially younger kids. It was really hard for parents with younger kids. So I would like to build a rubric together. We have 10 minutes left. And so I have a copy of that form. So this is where you need to chime in. We don't have time to build the entire thing, so we're just going to rough it out very quickly. But I want you to think about, so what are give me a grade level, a content area, some kind of learning outcome that you think is valuable. It should be something pretty rigorous. It shouldn't be identify the states or know certain people. That's very low level information. What are some big time skills that we want kids to be able to develop? So give me a grade level and a content area and something that kids need to know. Sorry, that took a long time to come up. Volunteer. First one to say it out loud gets their rubric made. remember, it can be anything. It could be creative thinking. It could be collaboration. I'm going to try and make it larger. Right. And it seems very slow to do.
What about a progression of understanding on being able to navigate through the Chromebook and technology?
Okay, so to use a Chromebook appropriately, so and it could be any device at all, right? And so we would probably give them some real world kind of focus for that, right? So use it appropriately for something in the real world. So maybe they're going to to create, because we want them at the top level of Blues, to create a project to help others understand the value of technology, something like that. So it ties it back to the technology again. Typing doesn't matter online because it'll fix itself later. So if we're thinking about that, let's talk about the assessment we're going to have kids do. So we're thinking about all the skills kids need to have to be able to use a Chromebook. What is a good point? What is a good assessment they could do that would demonstrate they've reached the point of strategic thinking?
I have them create a document in each of the different Google things.
Okay.
I create an item, and then I have them make an infographic and pull it all together at the final infographic.
Okay. So I'm going to interpret that as.
And these were freshmen.
That's okay. Yeah. Create a system of various documents to explain your solution to a problem or something like that. Is that okay?
Yep. Yep.
Because then that gives them some flexibility. They start to think about, okay, what kinds of documents am I going to collect or create? What do I know how to create? What's the best match for different documents? Like if they're going to use data to demonstrate a point and they want to create a chart, of course, they're going to go to a spreadsheet, but we hope they know that. So if that's our point of transfer, where they're given some kind of a real world problem, or they identify a problem or a phenomena, and they're going to create this multimedia suite of materials to explain it or propose a solution, what are the things they need to know? What are the basic things they need to know? Not to do, but to know. They need to know what a Chromebook is.
Yeah, they need to know the Chromebook, and they need to know how to navigate the Chromebook because it's
Right.
different than the computer.
Right. They need to know the different
Different Google products.
right document types that are in there. They probably need to know a lot more than that, but we only have like 5 minutes left. So once they've done that, there's probably a lot more than that. Then what are some of the basic skills that they need to be able to do?
Type.
Right. Type or input data in some way. So they do know how to type or use keyboard or voice typing, which only works on some of the documents. They need to know how to create, edit, and find their documents. Maybe organize them. They need to know how to link different documents. And there's a lot more they would have to learn. That would be the bulk of your, I mean, that's, if you're gonna do all of G Suite, that's gonna take you a while to get through all the tools. But there's just a general quick rubric. So then at the end, if they've gone through and they've created the system of documents and they've either presented to you, or maybe they put them on maybe they created a Google site and they posted it there and they had people come and look at it. What are some things we could do to get them to be reflective and to think metacognitively?
I have them teach somebody else.
Okay, some kids can't do that because they're not good teachers, right? So,
Well, I have them, once I teach them, I ask them to help somebody who's not as, who's shyer than them. And
okay,
it's amazing that even some of the special kids have risen to the occasion. You
right.
don't
So
know till you let
they've
them
done
try.
that though, once they've done that, how can you get them to reflect on what they just did? So you just shared your expertise. You now have expertise. What's the reflection that they're going to do?
I have them revise and make notes to improve it.
Very good. Because you really want them to think about their thinking, not thinking about the process that other kids are going through, which is helpful. I mean, that's an activity that certainly should demonstrate transfer, right? But to get to that point of extended thinking, we want them to realize what I have learned. So they might even not even realize some of the things they have learned. So they could do that. They could do I used to think, now I think kind of activity. I like that one a lot. That's very helpful. But you can see right there, very simple, very quick. It would obviously take a little bit longer to flesh this out. But there we've created a simple rubric for learning some very complex skills. Any other thoughts? I see Paula said she liked the idea of this learning progression. But you can see you could do this for just about anything. I've done it for critical thinking. We've done it for SEL topics, self-awareness and self-responsibility. I told you goal setting. Certainly every academic area that I've worked with, you could do this as well. I will tell you, if you're trying to develop a learning progression and you're only bringing in lower level standards, you get stuck, because the low level standards always end up being like in this area and you never get to strategic thinking. And sometimes you don't need to get to strategic thinking. Like I wouldn't do a whole lesson on just punctuation and help they get to strategic thinking and punctuation. Like something like that, I would build into a larger skill. Like,
I was going to point out that the final revision, a lot of times the children don't understand what all they've learned until they look back and say, oh, I learned how to do this, this, and this, because they can see the progression when they think back on it.
Yep. And something like Flipgrid is a really great way to have kids like, just tell me what you learned, and how do you, what do you know now that you didn't know before? So we're quickly running out of time. I appreciate you guys being here today and taking time out to do this. There is a session survey, and Lynn, you could decide whether you want to do it every single day or not. You did one yesterday. If you want to do this one today, you could do that one because it's a different topic. And it is linked on the agenda. And Lynn, I asked, and all these videos are going to be available on the Dell Texas Learning Network page. And Rachel can help us find that. They're not up yet. The one from yesterday is not up yet, but this one will be added to it. So
I'm putting it on my teacher resource page. I'm linking it all.
Good. And on this page, there are lots of other workshops you can still sign up for, and I'm sure, and they'll continue throughout the year. So we're at 10:45. As a musician, my mantra was start on time, end on time. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. You have my contact information if you didn't get something or you had a question. So please feel free to reach out and ask questions. All right, I'm going to turn off our recording.